This is Gemara Nedarim Daf Ayin Beis. Tonight's shir, as well all the shirim for the month of Teves, has been generously sponsored by a close friend of the Daf as a schos ilin neshama for Aryeh ben Rav Yaakov, a year that was zeicha to learn by Rav Naftali Trop, and as well has seen the Chavetz Chaim, I believe. B'siyata d'Shemaya, the learning of the entire Chabura should bring Aryeh ben Rav Yaakov to a higher in place in Gan Eden Shel Maila. So we're holding on Ayin Aleph Amud Beis. We're going to start from the two dots, 4 lines to the bottom. We read the Shaila yesterday. We're going to pick up from the Shaila before we move forwards. So says the Gemara, Yibayilahu, Geirushin Kishtika Dami Akama Damya. A fundamental Shaila. What happens if a woman makes a neder, makes a vow in the state of Erusin, we are assuming right now, and the husband hears it, and then he goes, and what does he do? He divorces his wife on that very day. So do we say the fact that he knows about it, and he knows that after he divorced his wife, he will not be able to do hafara, so therefore it's called a hakama? Or do we say no? Or do we say not? So says the Gemara, Lamay nafkamina. What practical relevance is this? 2 lines on the bottom of Ayin Aleph Amud Beis. Ki goyin shenadur v'shama ba'alav v'girsha. The wife made a neder, the husband heard, and then he divorced her. V'hadra b'yoymei. And he remarried her on that day. Now, yesterday we didn't hone in on this detail that he's remarrying her. And what's actually very interesting is that the Ran learns that it's a lav dafka. It's not particularly that he has to remarry her, but let's go to simple reading of the Gemara. He remarries her on that same day. So what's the shayla? If we're going to say that his act of divorce is tantamount to shtika, dim dami mati maferla. Therefore, what do we say? He can now, yes, be mefer the neder after he remarries her. But if we say no, that has the status of hakama, as if he certified and verified the vow, the neder, loy mati meferla. So fundamental shayla, how do we view gerushin with regard to nedarim? Is the gerushin like an act of shtika, or is the gerushin like an act of hakama? So as we turn over to Ayin Beis Amud Aleph, the Gemara begins by trying to prove this shayla. Ta shema, says the Gemara. Again, this should sound familiar. We had this a few days ago. When do we say that when the husband dies, the father regains the entire right to nullify the vow of his wife? It's only when the husband dies before hearing about the neder, then the neder goes to the husband. Then the neder goes to the father, that the father has the right to be made for the entire vow. Or the husband heard and it was made for his part. In any of these 3 scenarios, he didn't hear about it, he heard and he was made for his half, or he heard and he was quiet and then died. In all of these 3 cases, the father now has sole rights of being mefer the neder of his daughter. So now the Gemara articulates the raya. So now if you're going to tell me that the act of divorce is another form of shtika, listening nami, it should have also said in this brisa, Yishama v'giresh. It should have also said in this brisa, this case, that shama v'giresh. This should have been a fourth case in which the father regains full rights and can be made for the neder, and therefore midelaitani achi, for the fact that the brisa did not say this fourth case, shma mina, that gerushin is not kishtika, and rather it is kehakama. So a beautiful raya from the fact that the brisa lists 3 cases of that which is considered shtika, and that the father would regain full control of the vow of his daughter after the husband died, and did not list a 4th case of gerushin. That's a raya to what is the status of gerushin, and it's not a status of shtika, rather it's a status of hakama. Answers the Gemara, or I should say rebuts the Gemara, no raya, because ema seifa. Go look at the end of that brisa that says the following case. If he heard and he was mekayim, he heard and he was quiet and he dies the next day, then ein yachal hafer, he cannot be made, for the father does not get the rights. And based on the inference that we just made in the first part of the brisa, that gerushin has a status of what? Of akama, of certification damu. Listening, it should have said in the seifa, v'imshama v'girish. Should have said in the seifa the case of gerushin. Ela midlokatani achi, from the fact that the seifa, when listing cases that the father does not get back the rights, ein yachal lehafer, does not list the case of gerushin, shmamina gerushin kishtika damu, and therefore, as classically we have a steer in diukim that the reish and the seifa, each one points opposite ways. Ella meha leka l'masha mina, says the Gemara. There's no raya from this brisa. Why? I reisha dafka. If the reisha was specific, nasiv seifa misham reisha. So just said the seifa because of the reisha. I seifa dafka nasiv reisha misham seifa. Meaning we have a steer in diukim. For instance, the reisha and the seifa are contradictory to each other, and therefore there is no raya from this brisa, and therefore we are back to square one. We're back to the original shayla that we posed today. What is the status of gerushin? Does it have a status of shtika, or does it have a status of akama, of certification of the neder? We continue, says the Gemara, Tashima. Let's try again to bring a raya. We're about 14 lines from the wide lines of Ayin Beis and Mid Beis. The first one in line is Reisha. Tashima nadra v'yarusa. Our Mishnah. She made a neder while she was in Arusa. V'niskarsha, and then she got divorced. V'nisarsa by b'yom, and she ears again on that day. Filu l'meya, even to 100 people. What was the halacha in our Mishnah? The father and last husband could be made for the Nedarim. So Shema Mina, says the Gemara, you see from over here, this is a case of gerushin. So we see gerushin geshtika damu. Gerushin must have a status of shtika. Why? The Gemara articulates. Would the last aris be able to undo a vow that the first aris was mekayim? And now we're actually going to get a newfound insight into our original Mishnah. Perhaps when we read this Mishnah, this detail was a bit bothersome. And now the Gemara is honing in on this point that says the Gemara that if gerushin has the status of akama, has the status of certification, it's impossible that after that the latter husband would be able to be made for the neder, and therefore, seemingly, we have a raya that gerushin is kishtika. Says the Gemara, no raya, 5 lines from the wide lines. No, the case is the original aris never heard about the neder. Ask the Gemara 1 second. The Achiv never heard about the neder. My area by. Why does it say that it happened on that day? It's irrelevant how long after. If you never knew about the neder, it can even be 100 days later, asks the Gemara. Afilu acha meya yamim nami would have the same halacha. Answers the Gemara, kishlei shama aris v'shamav. The case of the Mishnah, whereas the aris did not hear, but the father did hear, and therefore the boy bayayim on that day who dematzi mefer. That's the reason why that only on that very day he can be made for the neder. Avamikan ve'eloch. From that day and onward, cannot be made for the neder, and therefore the rebuttal in the Mishnah stands and says the Gemara, we don't have a raya to our original shayla. Tashema, the Gemara continues trying to bring another raya. Nadra by bayayim. What happens, says the Gemara, what happens if she made a neder on the very day that she got married? V'gersha, in a similar case, she got divorced. V'chzira b'bayayim. And then what happened? She hechzira, she remarries. Perhaps this is the different lashon from this case in the case of the Mishnah. That over here she's hechzira, the Mishnah was a hadra. Either way, that's the shita of the Ran, that the Mishnah doesn't have to be the same person. But over here, the Gemara says explicitly, hechzira b'bayayim. He remarries her on the same day. What's the halacha? Says this brisa, ein yachol lahafer. He's not able to be made for the neder. So what do we see very clearly? Says the Gemara, 2 lines from the end of the Amid of Ayin Beis and Aleph. Shema Mina, we have a beautiful and articulate raya that gerushin must be kakamu dami. That gerushin must have the status of akamu, and that's why afterwards it can be made for the neder. And Amri hacha b'nesua askinan. And the reason why over here that, so says the Gemara, we have a raya that gerushin is kakama. Rebuts the Gemara once again that we don't have a raya. Amri. You know, we can answer that this brisa, the reason why Gersha v'echzira, when the guy remarried, you can't be made for the Nedarim is because hacha b'nesua askinon v'aynu taima dein yachal lafer. What's the reason? Mishom de'ein abal made for b'kaidim, a rule that we've seen many times, that if there was a neder that was made b'shas nesuin, then later on that neder cannot be reopened, and the neder cannot be made for by a latter husband. Therefore, this brisa is not a raya, because we could be madcha, we could push away and say that this brisa is talking about a case of nisuin. And interestingly enough, the Gemara leaves this. The Gemara doesn't have a raya, doesn't have a teretz. And the Ran over here, in classical Ran form, comes along and teaches us linear halacha on the third white line. He quotes us that it's a machlekes, Ramban and Rashba, what exactly is the halacha lemaisa. According to the Ramban, we have to be machmer. According to the Rashba, he is mekel. But let's move on to the Mishnah on Ayin Beis, Amid Beis. We turn over to Ayin Beis, Amid Beis, and once again we have a new Mishnah. So again, the previous Gemara ended on a little bit of a cliffhanger. The Gemara was not poishet the Shaila. As we pointed out, it's a machlokes Rishonim as the Ran coins it. And now we move over to Ayin Beis, Amid Beis with another fascinating Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, a startling statement. Derech Talmidei Chachamim, what is the manner of a Talmid Chacham? Actually, when his daughter leaves his rishos, before his daughter leaves his rishos, what does he say to her? He says to her, Kol Nedarim shenadarta b'teich beisi, any neder that you made whilst being in my house, harehein mufarim. A similar to Baruch Shabatrani by a bar mitzvah boy, says the Mishnah that Talmidei Chachamim, before Nisuin, before she leaves her father's rishos, the father would come over to her and tell her, any neder that you made in my house, they are annulled. And similarly, the husband, between Eris and Nisuin, before he brings her into his rishos, he would similarly say, any neder that you made before you came into my rishos, it is annulled. Why? So that when they get married, because he can no longer be made for those prior nedarim, ein mefirim b'kaidmin, and therefore, right before Nisuin, says the Gemara, says the Gemara, both the father and the husband say this statement to their daughter and their wife respectively, that what? Any neder they made prior is annulled. And the Ran points out that line that we just read, ein abal mefer b'kaidmin. So says the Gemara has another shayla. Ba'i Rami bar Chama. Baal Ma'u she'yifer b'loi shemiya. Seemingly a fundamental shayla, doesn't seem to have anything to do with our Mishnah, but of course our Mishnah is going to come along as a raya. Is a husband allowed to annul a vow without ever hearing about the vow? Answers the Gemara, the Gemara articulates the question, V'shama isha dafka, is the pasuk meduyak, is the pasuk specific when it says, and he hears the vow of his wife, who? Oy, lav dafka, or that's just the normal case, and a husband has a right to be made for to annul the vow even without hearing the neder come out of her mouth. Amar Rava, so Rava comes along to try to prove this shayla. And where is Rava going to prove this shayla? From none other than our Mishnah. Tashema, what our Mishnah teaches, before this daughter leaves his rishos, are annulled. Says the Gemara, in the case of the Mishnah, it's clearly the father doesn't know about the neder, and yet he's being made for the neder. A clear proof that he can be made for a neder without hearing it. Answers the Gemara, no raya. The Mishnah is referred to l'chi shama hu demefer. That what the father means, the derech Talmidei Chachamim, is that when I'm going to hear about the neder, then it's going to be annulled. Answers the Gemara, imkein ki lo shama lama li lemeimar. So says the Gemara, I don't get it. If that's the whole status of the Mishnah, that when he hears he mavers the Nedarim, so what is the reason that he says this whole declaration that El Kol Nedarim shenadarti b'tach beisi she'ein mufarim, the Lashon HaMishnah, what's the reason he says it before hearing about it? Answers the Gemara, Kamash Lan, you know what the Mishnah teaches? It's a chiddush. Urcha ditzura me'Rabbanan. What is the manner of a young Talmid Chacham? Lehadurei. The manner of a young Talmid Chacham is to go back and make sure that his daughter has no Nedarim. So there is no raya from the Mishnah. Why? Because the Mishnah is really referring to a case in which it's going to be mufar only when he hears about it. Why did the Mishnah say he says it earlier? To teach us that what is the derech, what is the manner of Talmidei Chachamim, to look after vows and get rid of them before he doesn't have any more chance. So Tashema, the Gemara continues, about 10 lines from the white lines. The first word in the line is La'adurei. Let's bring a raya for the end of the Mishnah, Miseifa. And the Mishnah says, the husband, before he does Nisuin, says as well, the husband says the same thing. So l'chayra, we have the same raya, that even though the husband did not hear about it, Oymer Allah, still he's able to be made for the neder. Answers the Gemara, the same rebuttal. Hachanami, the Amar Allah. Here is the same case that he said what? He said, the Amar Allah l'chi shamana, that when I hear about the neder, then it's going to be annulled, but not now. So says the Gemara, okay, attempt number 3, Tashema, let's bring another ayah. There's a Mishnah. This Mishnah we're going to get to in a few days on Daf Ayin Hey. Says the Mishnah, Kol Nedarim shetaduri. One says to his wife, any neder that you're going to make until I return from such and such place, harehein kayamim. All of those in Nedarim are mikuyam, are confirmed. Says the bright Mishnah on Ayin Hey, loy amar klum. But if he says arein mufarim, then we have a machlekes. If Lezer amar mufar, says the Gemara of Halei Shama. So you see, if he, according to the sheet of Rav Eliezer, even without hearing about it, he's able to be made for the Nedarim, a raya from the Mishnah Daf Ayin Hey. Answers the Gemara the same rebuttal, Achanami, the Amar that he said l'chi shamana when I hear about it. So says the Gemara of Alamali min hashta. If that is true, why does he have to do it right now? L'chi shama leifrla. He should do it when he hears about it. Answers the Gemara, and with this we conclude, Kasavar Dilma Maturinna hi shaita. That maybe the day that he hears about a neder, he's going to be tarud, he's going to be preoccupied with other things. He's not going to have the wherewithal and the clear mind to be made for the neder. And that's why he's saying it now, even though it doesn't really go into effect until he actually, in practicality, hears about the neder. So 3 different attempts at a raya, 2 from our Mishnah, 1 from the Mishnah on Daf Ayin Hey. The Gemara leaves off without any raya to our shayla, whether you can be made for without hearing about it. On tomorrow, we'll pick it up trying to bring another raya in Mirza Hashem.